Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friends, Sam Clement and Courtney Truss. Y'all say hello.
How's it going?
Hey, John.
Hey, how are y'all doing? Sam, I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. I'm doing a lot better than I would imagine a lot of people are over in eastern Ukraine. And obviously, we're talking about this yet again. But this seems to be the dominant story and sort of the news cycle. I mean, how can you avoid talking about the situation in the Ukraine?
Well, I don't think you can avoid it. And there's so many different avenues to look at, different perspectives and really different issues for each perspective, and so there's just a lot of things to talk about.
Now, earlier this morning, Courtney just kind of figuratively grabbed me by the collar and said, hey, I want to know about this. And Courtney, what were some of those questions that you had, relative to what Russia's currently doing over there?
Well, I know in watching the news, you see these lines, and they keep showing you line after line of Russians at ATMs trying to get rubles out, trying to get their money. And, I thought back to what would I do in that situation? And thinking about the Great Depression here in the United States and how people were shoving money under their mattresses. And that's kind of fell into the FDIC, protecting up to $250,000 in any single account. Well, so what does that look like in Russia? Do they have something similar to the FDIC guarantee? Why are people frantically trying to get rubles that are losing value as we speak?
First off, don't look at me as though I remember what was going on in the Great Depression. I'm just simply not that old. My father's not even really old enough for that. So I want to say that first and foremost. In terms of what they're doing is, you have a couple of photographs that are probably on every single news outlet,
right.
Run on the bank and all that stuff. And some of it's just, psychological. People feel much more comfortable when they can hold their currency, hold their money in their hands or put it in a bread box, whatever they're going to do with it, as opposed to having it be stuck inside the bank somewhere. And if the U.S., and the Western allies don't let some of the Russian banks onto the SWIFT system or whatnot, are they even going to be able to operate? So I think it's just more fear of the unknown for a lot of these Russian bank customers or clients or depositors, whatever you want to call them. Just more fear of the unknown and kind of what's the old expression of bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Yeah.
Go ahead and get some cash out, and that way you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, there's always a psychological aspect to bank runs, or if that's what's going on, people wanting their cash, because there's definitely a fear, especially with other countries, like John mentioned with SWIFT, just really the controls that lots of countries, the EU, the US, NATO countries are putting on Russia. It's going to instill fear in people. And there is something similar to FDIC, a deposit insurance agency over there that insures up to about 1.4 million rubles. But nonetheless, again, that's not enough to really stop people from wanting their cash. And I think bird in the hand is worth two in the bush is kind of a perfect way to describe it.
So if y'all were Russian right now, would you be running to an ATM? Would you already have your money in gold? What would your scenario be?
Courtney, if I live in Moscow, I would have some money in rubles, some money in the Bitcoin. And that actually sounds more like I'm from...
I thought that was pretty good.
Like more Baltic.
The people that have money, in Russia as anywhere, have already kind of diversified maybe some of their assets. Maybe you don't do it quite as much in the United States since the U.S. currency is the world's primary reserve currency, but I'd imagine the oligarchs and all those people that have the big wampum over there probably already have dollar-denominated assets somewhere, probably have a brick of $100 bills in the safe at home, have some rubles, have some euro, probably have a little bit of gold. So it's like anything else. The people that have money will have diversified and will still have money. And so there's people on the lower end of the income spectrums that probably don't have the capability of buying a whole bunch of gold and whatnot. And they're more dependent on the bank to provide currency. So those are the people that you're seeing, lined up at the ATM, those people in the lower economic quintiles, as they are solely relying on the banking system for their currency.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine the people like Abramovich and some of these other oligarchs with boats and, big UK soccer teams they own not being pretty extremely well diversified out of Russian currency.
Yeah, we're not talking about them. We're talking about like the average Russian.
That's what I was getting at. That it's the people where we're going after. Essentially, there's all these lockdowns on the oligarchs, and they're the ones that are already kind of prepared for it. And so it's the people that haven't probably been prepared for it, probably because they didn't really need to as much, that are really kind of freaking out right now.
Yeah, whenever, it doesn't matter what, this is going to be, I'm going to sound very much like a cynic, but I mean, I'm known to be a little cynical at times. Whenever you try to punish, a country, the people at the lower end of it will always feel the brunt of it the worst.
Right.
Always. It doesn't matter what you do. You can put sanctions on Vladimir Putin, guess what? He still has a dacha, he still has plenty of stuff. You put sanctions on Russia, it's the people that can afford it the least that will feel the pinch the most.
Yep.
And Courtney, you had some other questions too, not just about queuing up outside of ATMs.
Well, I mean, also, they reported that they're losing access to certain platforms. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that is necessarily from Russia limiting that to keep, information from coming out of Russia, which I don't know how they would really be able to do that. Or I know part of it also is American-based or other-based companies saying, we will not conduct business, we will not let you use our platform because you are Russian. I know they talked about Instagram, Google, like a lot of the ability to use PayPal
Facebook,
or Apple
MasterCard,
Pay.
Visa.
So those are more, that's being implemented from the company side.
Well, those will have a little bit more of an impact. But even so, what happened in 2014 when Russia essentially annexed Crimea? They were working on some of their own sort of measures as well. Merchant capture type stuff, and they're the Russian equivalent of SWIFT. They've also gotten into an agreement with the Chinese to be able to provide capital and access to the Chinese financial system. So as long as the world's second largest economy, i.e. China, is not locking Russia out of the global networks as the West is trying to do, Russia will still be able to access capital and the international markets, if at worst indirectly.
And there's still, carve-outs for the largest bank in Russia and energy-related. There's still carve-outs there. And I think my thought with that is it leaves a possible next step. We're not pushing all our chips in right now, or Western allies aren't pushing all their chips in right now on sanctions. There's still more punishment that we can kind of instill on them. But I think the problem with that is those punishments also hurt us and hurt the Western countries.
Well, it hurts us, and then also, obviously, maybe we're not dealing with someone who's currently working with all of his marbles or all his faculties. You throw the death knell financial at him, you're completely shut off, we're going to blockade the country and all that stuff. Let's face it, man has a whole bunch of nuclear weaponry.
Half of them in the world.
Yeah, and also, he's not, up to this point, hasn't really brought all the Russian troops to bear on Ukraine yet. So you make the punishments that much worse. You put Moscow back into a corner where it's going to have to fight like hell to get out of, and that's a fine line that the West really has to tread right now.
Well, to that point, do you think that this has escalated more than what maybe Putin thought it would?
Oh,
absolutely.
Absolutely. I don't think that Vladimir Putin thought that the Ukrainians east of the Dnieper River, which pretty much bisects the country. He undoubtedly thought that they'd throw down their guns pretty quickly. Because that's heavily Russian-speaking, and we have the Donbass, which is mostly Russian anyhow, Russian ethnicity. But east of the Dnieper River is heavily influenced by Russia. Just heavily. So I truly do believe, and I couldn't be. Last time I spoke to Vladdy, he didn't tell me what he was thinking, but I'm pretty certain that was not expecting the Ukrainians to put up much of a fight.
Yeah, there's already been, articles out talking about Vladimir Putin being a little upset with the lack of progress that they've had on some of these fronts. I think it's hard. You also got to picture he's not just a normal Western democracy president.
Right.
I don't think his generals are probably necessarily always being the most honest. It's hard to imagine them saying this is going to be kind of difficult to do. You think they got to be giving him a glass half full viewpoint on what they can do. And
undoubtedly.
Similar to what happened in World War II with some of the German generals, over-promising.
Over-promising and under-delivering. Exactly what you don't want to do. But no, Courtney, without a doubt, this has been much more difficult than what I would imagine anyone inside the Kremlin thought it would be.
And even internally, within Russia, they've talked about people protesting, which isn't uncommon for people to protest and be put in jail in Russia for that. I think they said that they had detained like 400 Russians or 400 protesters at one rally. I mean, do you think that that's surprising, or is that just kind of...
right now with sort of the media news blackout that we've had from Russian sources for all intents and purposes, and, I don't know what's true and what's not true. And when you have something like that that's going on, people rising up against Vladimir Putin, 400 people in a protest in St. Petersburg or Moscow is nothing.
But there are some serious protests going on. I mean, there is serious amounts, and I think that there's always been protests in Russia. They haven't been as probably safe and free as protests are in the Western countries. However, I think, to me, it's been a little shocking to see how aggressive some of these protests have been against war.
Well, I mean, the thing is, and the longer it lasts, the more the protests will grow. I mean, if on the first day of fighting the Ukrainians had thrown down their guns and retreated east of that river I mentioned, they're waving flags and singing songs in Red Square. I mean, they're down the Nevsky Prospect in St. Petersburg. No one's complaining whatsoever. However, when people start coming home in body bags, that's when you start having the protests.
And you're seeing just massive amounts of support for Ukraine that I think probably wasn't fully expected. And I think you're also seeing more pushback from Ukrainians than was expected.
I can't overstate really what Zelensky has meant to the Ukrainians, and even to the Ukraine's reputation around the world. I mean, having the president be down there on the street, with the phone, and who knows, he could be going down on the street there and then going back and hiding in the cave. But even so, he's giving the appearance of leadership, of courage, of resistance against the Russian bear, and that's made all the same. I hate that the sound might not be the right word. Makes it seem all the more romantic in the eyes of a lot of other people. You have the leader of the country against a insurmountable foe, and he's standing up there, and so. And that has undoubtedly helped galvanize the remainder of the country. There's absolutely no way, but when you really take a look at it, you've got a lot of Ukrainians that have left the country. You have over 100,000 going to Poland, and you've had a lot of people get the hell out of there. So it's not all Ukrainians, but Zelensky's courage, and it truly, I would say it is courage, because if Russian forces get them in, he's probably dead. It just stands in absolute stark contrast to what happened in Kabul.
And it's some of the quotes that we're getting out of him. I mean, it's almost this rallying cry. There was a quote going around him saying, "I don't need a ride out, I need ammunition."
I mean, that's something that I was about to quote that too.
I mean, whether that's true or not, again, that's the rallying cry. And you're seeing business support. You're seeing breweries turn to making Molotov cocktails instead of any sort of alcohol. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're just seeing all of this support and seeing videos.
The way some of that booze is coming out, they don't really need to do much.
No, it's just a rag.
You know what I'm saying? Just stick a rag in the bottle.
You're seeing civilians throwing hundreds of Molotov cocktails onto some of these vehicles coming in from Russia. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is something that I think is hard to fight against.
And they're having blockade, they're creating blockades to their own cities, protecting. So there's definitely a sense of camaraderie.
And if you're a Russian conscript, you got some kid 18 to 22 or whatnot, his officer's been telling him it's these people are going to welcome us with open arms, or the Ukrainians are going to throw down their guns as soon as they see us coming in. Hey, that's cool. I mean, I'm all for an adventure. All of a sudden they start firing back at you. All of a sudden, your morale starts to sink a little bit when the resistance, kind of bows its back.
Yeah.
When I forget which city Russia did overtake, and they even commented the Russians were surprised by the Ukrainians who came up and were screaming and protesting that they were there. It's they were standing in shock that they were getting any type of...
I think that's Kharkiv, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, which I'm probably not. Again, I'm not Eastern European.
Yes.
Just sound like one on podcast.
Well, the other thing that I wanted to ask y'all about was, they've talked about the interest rates for the bank. Obviously, they've shut down the market in Russia to prevent it from completely collapsing this week. They talked about the interest rate going from 9% to 20% and then possibly going to another 25%. I mean, what does that really mean?
Well, I think first off, you mentioned them shutting down the market. And I think it's worth noting that the last time they did that, it didn't open for 75 years. So,
Oh gosh.
Maybe.
there's a reason some of those stocks are cheap is because, you may not get your money for 75 years. If the
Well,
company's
it's a historical lack of rule of law and strong individual property rights.
Right.
So, in terms of 20-25%, probably just to keep people from taking their money out. I mean, we're making sure that there's ample liquidity in the system. I mean, Russia is. They import a lot of their consumer goods, but it's perhaps it's not as trade reliant as perhaps we are in terms of just overall how we live our lifestyles. And the average Russian out in the Siberia and whatnot probably won't feel too much of an impact of taking the overnight lending target to 20-25%. So in terms of just the practical, what does it mean day in and day out to the average Russian? Probably not too much. It's just
Except that you won't be taking a loan anytime soon.
Probably not taking a loan at all
Right.
right now. Probably not looking to open up a business right now at all. But the damage done to Russia really will depend on how much longer this lasts. If they can end it by the end of the week, say, this is what we want. Zelensky says, okay, we won't become a member of NATO. Although, why would he say that now? I think it would kind of go back to what happened in 2014. Throw some toothless sanctions on Russia, or these things kind of the heavier-handed ones kind of expire and kind of get back to business as usual.
I think it'll be interesting to see though if there is any sort of agreement that they come to. One, what that looks like to where Putin can go back and say I won.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, it's hard to imagine what that looks like for me.
It's real hard to imagine what that looks like, but part of the reason, which is probably part of the reason why, from news reports I have read, they're more missiles, more guns, more planes.
For him to save face.
Yeah, well, to win.
To win,
Yeah.
to outright win.
Yeah.
But do you think it's because he feels like he's like his back's against the wall and he's like, oh, I'm a fighter, I'm not going to just cower on this. Like, I'm going to...
Well, of course. But I don't think it's the sanctions as much as the Ukrainians having stiffer backs.
Right.
I mean, he knew ahead of time that there'd be sanctions if he invaded Ukraine. He's not going, oh my God, I can't believe that they're going to be doing this. I mean, so as you mentioned last week, I mean, the Russians had amassed $640 billion worth of international reserves.
And no U.S. treasuries.
Yeah, no. I mean, just tons of gold. So they've started stocking up, but they can't live forever on $640 billion.
And I also think a lot of that is kind of locked up right now with a lot of the sanctions, and I don't think they have the ability to really use all that. But at the same time, it's not a Western democracy.
Yeah.
Pain in some of these cities is a lot more bearable to someone like Putin than it is a president who has to be reelected in 2 years.
Yeah.
That's right.
I did hear on NPR, I believe it was yesterday, about, and it was the president of Ukraine speaking to, did they apply to be a member of the EU? Is that correct?
Well, I mean,
Yes.
they have had their application in and desires to get NATO, and he's screaming from the streets of Kiev, let us in now, damn it. I mean,
Well, that's
let
what he
us
said.
in.
He's like, if you truly back Ukraine, then join us. Like, let us be part of the group and support us, as an EU nation.
We'll have to see whether or not Brussels will allow that to happen. And
You just wonder if, like, the passion that you kind of mentioned, like, people are like, oh, we support you, or, will that help them get the stamp of approval?
he's a pretty smart guy. I mean, he's trying to strike while the iron is hot on
Right.
that type of stuff, both literally and figuratively. And then also, truly does believe he's fighting for his country's very survival. So, which I think maybe if they had laid down their guns at the start of it, probably wouldn't be talking about Ukraine's very survival. Kind of go in there, throw him out, throw in some lackey, and Putin. I mean, that's what Putin wanted. Now all of a sudden, fighting a heck of a lot harder, and it's we are probably talking about Ukraine's very survival right now.
I agree.
How many
completely.
people do you think actually, like, knew where Ukraine was before this conflict happened? in the
Well,
United
I think
States?
people.
I mean, the average American probably 20-25%.
I think people discount too the size,
Oh,
both in
right.
terms of geographical size, but then the how big the country is in terms of population too. I mean, there's a lot of people there. It's not some tiny Baltic country. It's 45-ish million people in this, which is a third of Russia's population. They are much smaller than Russia, but that's not as small as I think some people may have imagined it being a couple million people. I mean, it's a massive country.
It's not
with
like one of the
massive
Baltic
resources.
states.
Yeah.
So for their ability to fight back, more so than the Lithuanians or the Estonians or the Latvians, I mean, Ukraine can put up more of a fight, without a doubt. What other questions might you have on this, Courtney?
No, I mean, maybe, this is where you get into the conspiracy theorist thoughts of, well, or maybe they're in cahoots, and Russia, I don't think that Ukraine would be supportive of Russia killing people, but, could it be, hey, let's create conflict for a week, and then that's why we can get into the EU, and then we'll be puppets for Vladimir Putin? Or is Vladimir Putin saying, hey, let's start conflict over here. I understand that we might lose lives. I understand that I might have sanctions, but back over here, I'm doing something with China that the world doesn't know. To just basically keep everyone's focus somewhere else when there might be something behind the scenes that we're not aware of.
The first conspiracy that you threw out, definitely not. I don't I don't think Zelensky wanted to do that whatsoever. The second one,
I think they're always doing something.
They're always doing something, and they hashed out something with the Chinese. Obviously, the Chinese haven't cut them out. They're buying natural resources. The response has been a little bit more muted out of Beijing than I think Putin would have wanted. But I've truly, when the dust settles and the smoke clears, all that stuff, I really, honestly don't believe Vladimir Putin thought that they would have this level of pushback from the Ukrainians themselves.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, thank you all so much for listening. We always love to hear from you all. So if you have any questions or comments, please, by all means, let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, please go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of awesome information. With that, you guys have any more comments or thoughts on this topic here today?
That's all I got.
That's it.
That's all I've got today. Yep, too. Y'all take care.